You bring up a good point, Coach.
Sometimes I do.
Pre-conversation, progress, not perfection.
Progress, not perfection.
I said I was running out of time. You said I probably started too late.
Dude, hey, man, always the bearer of bad news, but oftentimes it's all about being in reality. And we hope today you're having a great reality. It's July 12th, 2021. Welcome aboard. This is the Crushing Iron Podcast, and we are episode 494.
Yeah.
That's one of those numbers, again, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
Do this for a long time. I hope you had an awesome weekend. If you got out racing, hope you enjoyed yourself. Hope you had some good results. Hope you're happy with it. Hope you got the put out the effort that you wanted to and executed your game plan. We know there's a little bit of a busier weekend. The weekend after July 4th tends to be a little bit slower, but we know Musselman 70.3 happened here in the U.S. That was Ken Hammond's first shot at it, and I thought I at least know I got a little bit of feedback from the course itself. Beautiful venue from what I understand. I know the water was basically perfect. The weather was perfect. And a quote from Phil Jones after the race was that Ken Hammond, and this is has always been a bone of contention with us and Ken.
He didn't come to the.
Ken is one of my favorite race directors. He is one of my favorite guests, my favorite guests, and he puts on now what I think are two excellent races in Ironman Ohio 70.3 and now Musselman 70.3. So if you ever have a chance to do one of his races, do him. He really is an awesome guy. As a family dude, he does a lot of hard work, and he's just an awesome guy. However, having said that, we gave Ohio 70.3 when we went up and I participated and you spectated. We've been back and spectated. I think we gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and our only beef was what?
The food post-race.
The post-race food I thought was an epic.
Don't tell me he laid out Rubens.
It was an epic failure. I was like, listen, I'm a simple man. I like the pizza, the Coke, and the Snickers. I feel like that's budget friendly, and you can't really go wrong. And he said, we'll see what's going on, and he obviously didn't listen to us, and basically said, I'll do what my own thing was. But
he's his own man.
He is his own man. And if I will scroll back quickly before we get into our intro to see what Sarah said. Phil says to tell you and Ken Hammond he nailed the post-race food. Best barbecue chicken he's ever had, and salted potatoes. Now, I'm not going to lie. That speaks to me. I also saw a picture, because it looks like this picture he got in like his own little to-go tray. He got some barbecue Lay's, some salted potatoes, and some barbecue chicken. Ken, I can get behind that. I can really get behind that. Anything with chips that's salty, I can always get behind salted potatoes. Things that are easy to digest post-race, which is why I think pizza is such a great thing. And as long as they had Coke on hand, then I think I'm good to go. So, hey, I'm looking forward to Mike and I will be up spectating Ohio in a few weeks. So we look forward to seeing what all the great post-race food you have to offer, Ken. But
Musselman.
Yeah.
5 stars.
5 stars. 5 stars. Yeah, and now that Mike and I are we've been in the podcast iTunes review world, and we know how inconsistent reviews are. Now that we're also in the Airbnb world, we're also a little more sensitive to how reviews go. So Ken, you get 5 stars in my book, buddy. We can't be those guys that say, hey, I absolutely loved the race. It was perfect. I loved everything about it. Seriously, 0 complaints. 4 stars. You're like, where's I can't give up 5. So, Ken, you're awesome. We look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. And speaking of that, we look forward to enjoying this podcast today. If it's your first time tuning in, welcome. We come to you twice a week. We always have, traditionally Mondays and Thursdays, but always twice a week. We've been a little bit backlogged the last few weeks with vacations and camps, and haven't really been on our Monday, Thursday usual rollout, but it feels good to be back and on schedule, getting this out on Monday. We talk about it all. We talk about triathlon. We talk about life. We talk about everything in between. We'll do swim, bike, and run detailed podcasts. We'll do race recaps. We'll do race previews. Have on the occasional guests like Ken Hammond. But for the most part, Mike and I, as best friends, coaches, athletes, just sit back, relax, have an open, honest discussion about what we're going through, oftentimes what our athletes are going through. Oftentimes, we're also pop into our Facebook group, which is Crushing Iron Group. If you want to be a part of that, answer one simple question, we'll let you right in. A lot of awesome people in there. It was really fun to read some of the success stories that we read over the weekend of people that have just listened to the podcast. And while we coach, hundreds of athletes across the globe, it's always great to see and hear of feedback that just listeners have for our podcast and the benefits that they get from it. It was fun reading those yesterday, and always, I know for me and for you as well, just is kind of uplifting when you get into the grind of doing 494 podcasts and you don't miss a week of 2 weeks in a row. It's great to hear. It kind of gives me a little bit of a kick in the pants to keep going. But that's it. Mike and I aren't, we're just coaches and athletes and people. We're not experts. We're not professionals. We're just weathered. I think that's what we came up with last week. We're just weathered old.
That's fair.
Old men. And so we hope you can take something from this podcast today and apply it to your life and keep you happy and healthy, because that is our number one goal.
Yeah, and speaking of, I'd like to give a little shout out to Jason Rameli, who's here, sitting up there in the Normatec boots at $75 an hour.
Yeah, we haven't told him that yet.
We haven't told him, but he's going to find out on the podcast.
Yeah, he is. And he just had a bike fit this morning, and boy, did he need it. But yeah, how was it? Oh, yeah, and this podcast is brought to you by... We don't have sponsors. I forgot to mention that. We don't have sponsors. We don't have ads. We just try and keep you happy and healthy and do it.
Yeah.
I have like 9 different topics I could go with today. But I feel like you have one as well. You have that look on your face, like I feel sparked. No,
I have sparked, but I don't have a concrete topic.
No.
Nope. I'm deferring, much like everyone else has done this year.
This is true. Everyone is deferring.
Deferrals.
It is the year of deferrals. Like I think everyone thought last year was the year of deferrals, but really it was the year of forced cancellations and postponements. But this year, it is kind of crazy to look at the next. Like I just took my usual mid-season kind of vacation time break around July 4th because it is the best time for me to take it, because most races just don't happen because of the holiday, and then it kind of slows. But then with Ohio 70.3, Lake Placid the same weekend, you've got just like bam, 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 race after race after race after race after race. You get people that are qualifying for 70.3 World Championships, figuring out how they're going to do that the week after Ironman Wisconsin or the week before Ironman Chattanooga. You got an Ironman Texas race that was postponed to October. That's on the same day as Kona. You got Arizona, you got Florida, you got Maryland. You got Atlantic City. You got all like Oceanside is, obviously posting. It's going to be a jam-packed end of the year. And it's been really interesting to watch and see athletes and how they've kind of navigated dealing with, the condensed nature of this year's schedule and how they're approaching it. And I thought that was a topic we could go for today in terms of like the best way to lead up to a race, in terms of like, because people always ask, where should I put a race? Should I put it 8 weeks out, 12 weeks out, 16 weeks out? And there's a lot of ways I think to go about that, but I thought that was something we could touch on today. We had a guy yesterday do a 70.3 at Musselman 2 weeks out from Lake Placid. In my opinion, if you're going to do a 70.3 close to it, 2 weeks out is like perfect, because you can get like your one last hard workout in and then just taper your way into the race. 3 weeks out, it's kind of no man's land, but I thought about that doing a topic for today. I also thought after, I'm doing the single parent action till Friday of this week. And so yesterday I woke up, I had a long run on the schedule. I knew I had to get out the door or fairly early for, as you know, it stormed pretty much on and off all day yesterday. It was like, it was hard to find a window. Had an hour and 10-minute run to get in, and I was like, well, I can't. Hayden's not really there with riding his bike, so I'm gonna have to see if I can fit him in the stroller. And our Hayden is a robust, not soon to be 5-year-old. He is like a 6 or 7, or he's very long. So I put together the stroller. He got in it, and I kind of laughed because I was thinking like, dude, you don't fit in this. But I was like, dude, can you make it? Do you think we can do this? He was like, yeah. He's like, let's go to the Riverwalk. So we packed it up, loaded up. Took me about 20, 25 minutes, as it is to do anything with a 4 or 5-year-old. Got over there, got him out, put him in it, and I mean, it's like I put the picture up on when I uploaded the run to Strava. I was like, I think he's a little bit too big, and I showed you a picture before the cast. Like his legs are like. It's like putting the adult person in like the kid bed. Like their knees and to the ankles like hanging off the side.
Yeah, that was definitely a double taker.
It was definitely a double taker. Like you should have seen and you hear this a lot from moms, like that other moms can be super judgy of what you do as a parent, like especially for moms. Oh, you should have seen the judgment looks I got from the judgy run moms that were running yesterday. But I was like, hey, and I was like, do you think you can handle this? He's like, yeah, I can do this. So we park at the place we usually do for the events that we have here at the sculpture thing right there I said, all right, so let's go. And he said, all right, I want to go to the pedestrian bridge. I'm like, dude, what do you mean you want to go? So it's in a stroller, okay? And Hayden weighs like 55, 60 pounds. I'm thinking, what do you mean you want to go to the pedestrian bridge? I was like, that means I got to run you up that hill coming out of Chattanooga 70.3 Ironman transition. I'm like, no. He's like, yeah, I want to go. I'm like, all right, I need to warm up first. So we take off the other direction. We get warmed up, and that's when I started getting like the very, very nasty, like judgy. Like, they wouldn't even look at me. They were just staring at Hayden and like they do like the head nod or like, I'm like, oh my gosh. And so what the game was now was like, cause it's 4 and 5-year-olds. They don't really care about what they say. They just say what they think. Like the day before I took them to Coolidge Park for a snow cone. We're playing whatever that game is where you have like a thing you put on your hand that's got Velcro attached to it and you throw a tennis ball to try to catch it with it. We were playing that game. And this muscle dude, typical muscle guy, very skinny legs, jacked up top, tank top, on this phone, walking like, a pit bull or whatever. And I was walking by Hayden, and his dog just like pops a squat, just like takes a dump, and he didn't have a bag. It wasn't picking up his poop. And Hayden looks at me, like yells across 20 yards, and goes, "Hey, Dad, he's not picking up his poop." And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm about to get like body slammed across the. So and the guy keeps walking. Didn't pick up his poop, which is a huge pet peeve of mine. Gets about 5 more feet away, and then and Hayden yells out, "Hey, Dad, why is that guy not picking up his poop?" And I'm like, right now I'm trying to avoid like getting squashed right now. Okay, but this like musclehead guy. So he obviously says, and I've talked about him before a lot when he, I'll take him to the store back when he used to fit in it, and we'll go by people on the bike and they'll be like, with not wearing a helmet, he'd be like, they're not making a safe choice. They're not making a safe choice. But he's just like crushing. So then what I started to keep him engaged, because you've met him and he will talk your ear off if you let him. So I'm trying to breathe and push in the humidity and get up some of these hills. And I'm like, all right, you think we can catch that guy? He's like, no. I'm like, what do you mean we can't catch him? I was like, I think we can catch him. So we'd catch him. And then as soon as we'd catch him, you know what he'd say?
What?
You're right, Dad. You caught him. And I'm like, dude, like keep your mouth shut. Like I'm trying to keep you engaged so we can like make it through an hour and 10 minutes. Like he didn't have any devices. I was playing his music playlist, but then that's what he was doing. He was just saying, but anyway, it got to the point, we went to eat a first watch after, but the point of that was like how much effort sometimes it takes to get in. Cause for me, like the ratio of getting ready to do that run, because I had to take the stroller out of its like bag, put the wheels back on, pump up the tires.
That's like going for a bike.
It's like in driving, like, we used to drive, it was like, the effort it takes to go to like what I would consider like an equal ratio workout. So it probably took me, my run was an hour and 10 minutes. It probably took me every bit of an hour and 10 minutes before and after to just make it happen. I know that's the case with a lot of, parents and just even people that are single in terms of like where you live and what your work is and like where you have to go, because some people don't live in the best places to run or ride outside or just drive to the pool, and just the difficulty that has, but also what the kind of, I think how much better you feel when it's done, because you took so much extra work to get it done, and you're done. You're like, see, I put all that extra effort, when sometimes you get to run from your front door and you're just like, I don't really want to. So we can talk about motivation, we can talk about races this time of year, how to approach races that might not be technically, because again, we have a lot of athletes, and you do too, like that just have races like stacked upon. They're like, is this a good idea? And you're like, not really, but we kind of just dealt the cards we got. So kind of making the best you can this year. So I thought that would be, so those are my 2 topics for today.
What were they again?
One, racing, and where to put specific races and how to approach them leading up to your big day, right? Because again, a lot of people have 70.3s in Olympics. Because even a lot of smaller races, half marathons, like basically everything is backdated into like late Q3, late Q4, because the beginning of the year was so iffy for a lot of people. And the other one is just finding a space in where you are motivation wise to find the extra time to get it done, even when it's not easy.
Well,
you can totally relate.
Yeah, I can totally relate. What I'm trying to remember, was my last race Ironman Wisconsin, or Louisville? Was it Wisconsin?
It was Louisville.
It was Louisville?
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that, actually. I've got Ironman Chattanooga. It'll be like over about 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a long time.
I know. I'm wondering how much that's going to affect me without having any like, do I go, because I always used to sort of be, we've both sort of been less races, the better type thing. And if you got a big race, kind of just train to that race, and I guess mix in, the half quite a ways away is typically how I've done it. But like you said, this year has just been crazy. And there's been a lot of sprints popping up before Ironman and like, the weekend before, and just, 5Ks or whatever they may be. So I don't know. I'm interested. I'm going to be interested to see how it goes, You know, I feel like you need some racing, you know, and have you seen, first of all, can I ask you this? Have you seen people, like generally, do you have a feeling of, hey, it's been a year and a half since I raced, and do you feel like generally the people have done better or like struggled because they weren't used to the race vibe?
That's a great question. And it depends, as is the answer to pretty much all of our, we could title every podcast, It Depends. It's interesting. It's just a very, very interesting year. Obviously and this is a conversation that because I think you have to take a lot of things into consideration. And I think a lot of us get one thing that I think is surprising people on two fronts is people put a lot of work in 2020 that, you know, if you were consistent in 2020 and didn't get to race, you've been consistent this year, then you're probably going to get close to or exceed your expectations in like even your first race. You might not nail it because, as you know, like I think you always need one race to just dust the rust off, get it right, figure out your pacing, and most importantly, get to that area of pain and uncomfortability where you're like, I know what that feels like. I'm okay with it. I can last long. Because I think you just need to be reminded of that because you shouldn't go there that much in training, you know, especially for long distances. So I think you have people on one end who put a ton of work in, are getting incredibly rewarded for all their hard work and success. Then you have the same on the other end of the spectrum. You get athletes that are going into races. And I think everyone is guilty of this to an extent, is that we just assume because we've, quote unquote, been a triathlete for an extra year that we automatically are better than we were the year before. Even if people don't look back at the training that they've not done, right? Like if you took, like let's say you raced in late 2019, you know, you did like a Louisville, September, October race. Most people take, you know, quite a bit of time off. You know, they take, you know, they'll say they took 2 months off, September, October, you take November, December off. It's the holidays. You start getting back to work in January. Well, January, February, March is when things started to get a little bit hectic last year. Things were shutting down. The pool's been gone. And, you know, races were gone. So people really struggled with, not a lot of people, some people struggle with motivation and like, what are they going to do? There's no races, so why should I be training? Then they hop in this year and we just kind of assume as humans, I think that, oh, well, I've been a triathlete for a year more. I should automatically be faster. Yeah. You know, right? Well, if you haven't done the training and you haven't been consistent, you took months and months and months off doing absolutely nothing, or you've taken more days off than you ever had, then no, you're not going to be better. So I think that assumption also hurts athletes in terms of like what they see is like, oh, well, you know, I PR'd in 2019, but I didn't PR in 2021. Well, what was your lead up like in 2019? Oh, well, I basically nailed 2018 the year before, and I really had a great season of consistency in 2019. So you had a great race. Well, 2020, what happened? Well, I took a lot of time off. Obviously, you know, people were, you know, stressed out or had anxiety or just, you know, didn't have the motivation, maybe put on a little bit of weight. And then you kind of got in this year. Now you're like, oh, well, I just don't really know what's going on. Oh, what do you mean don't know what's going on? Like, that's just, it's not a bad thing. It's just reality, which is, again, I think a lot of people in general, and triathletes especially, don't really operate in reality. They operate in hopes and dreams and assumptions and expectations that they create a year beforehand, but it's not really based on action. It's based on assumption. And so you have athletes on both ends of the spectrum doing those things. I think everyone has said it was good to be back racing. I learned a lot, and I learned a lot of people's transitions are like epically slow. Like they're just going through the motion. Not that most people, right, are going to lose a race on transitions. However, you and I both know a guy who in like 2017 missed a Kona slot by 1, swam, biked, and ran faster than the guy ahead of him, but the guy ahead of him had faster transitions and ended up taking his Kona slot from him. So yes, they do matter to an extent. But I think pacing, I think nutrition is something it's something that you can't replicate, even if you want to replicate it in training. You can't, because it's not a race. You're not going to get caught up and swept up in, you know, the guy mowing his grass two doors down in the cul-de-sac. I'm like, Johnny was out, you know, cutting his grass today in a level 5, and it really got my amps going. So I decided to like really bring it home hard. That's not, but when you race, it does different things to you. And I think how you manage the race energy, how you do and perform outside in a real world environment. Also, like I had some athletes last week and say, I just haven't been outside enough. I just haven't been outside. I mean, I think it's negatively affecting my performance. And I would agree, like, especially because it's not so much that smart trainers and indoor training are all bad. It's when the length of time and the amount of those sessions totally swallows up whole the amount of time you spent outdoors, because most people didn't do jack outside last year. Like, even if they could, they stayed inside. So now you've just gone longer and longer and longer without doing. So I think everyone's learning something. That's why almost every athlete that said, hey, I've got a race this weekend, can I race? I've been like, yeah, go. Like, the more you can get back that feeling and that flow of, this is what it feels like to race. This is what it feels like to have the energy. This is what it feels like to, have the pre-race years. I need to get my nutrition nailed down. I'm like, sure, do it. Like, go ahead. And get back in the flow, because we have a lot of rust to dust off this year.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. I just think that it's interesting you say that people haven't been outside enough, because that's one of those things that I tend to be outside all the time. And it's like the things like the wind and, like a bug flying in your ear, and, like the things that are different than a trainer ride. And I'm just curious though, because I constantly associate feelings during my training and I kind of try to link them to how I feel in races. So I'm always in that mode, and that maybe not the whole time, but for me, that's a big practice. And I've talked about it before, but I'm always like, even yesterday in that run, I was like, okay. And I was running on the chat course, which I'm going to be running. I'm like, all right, this is going to be how am I going to feel here? What am I, I just start thinking about that. And I guess that's the best I got. I mean, we always talk about, quote unquote, train harder than you're going to play or whatever, or practice harder than you're going to, have to play in the game, and it'll make it easier. So I kind of tend to do stuff like that, but like, as much as I crave a race right now, I don't think I am ready. I mean, you can just do it.
You can say you're not ready.
Huh?
You could do it, but could you do it and you'd be happy with it? Two different.
I don't know.
Things.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, it's just always been like Ohio. I've been contemplating doing that, and I just don't feel like my swim's ready, and I don't want to go through that bloodbath, to get out and ride, and I just.
Are you racing Ohio?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I think one of the best things I think about when you approach a race that's not your big race of the year is, I think, one of the best because I think a lot of people put way too much pressure on that race, because what they see is, this race is basically going to tell me how great or terrible I'm going to do in my big race. Like, that's how a lot of people see, if the people label it their B race of the year, like, they're 70.3 before they're full. Like, they use that as like,
yeah, okay, this is the crystal ball.
This exactly, right? This is my crystal ball. This is my, I did 5.5 hours at Chattanooga 70.3, right? So I did it. It was a hot day. So I did 5 hours at Chattanooga 70.3. That means if I multiply that by 2, then that gives me 11 hours, add 30 minutes, if you want to use that math, then I should be around 11:30 for an Ironman. That's crushing my goal. I'm there. So you also get this like false sense of confidence, right? They're like, I'm going to do it. I'm on the right track. On the other end, they also, if you think about where you are and how much time you've put in and the work you've put in, that's again, going back to just back to being in reality of like how much work you've put in. That's, I think, the beauty of getting a race in and your mindset before it's your big race, because listen, all races matter and you should approach them like they matter, because we don't get to race that often, right? Or a lot of people don't. Is you should race free, right? You should think about nailing the things that can disrupt your ultimate performance, not the performance itself. So like, in my opinion, if you're doing a 70.3, like if I was going to do a 70.3 before full this year, my goals would be, 1, execute my pacing, have fun doing it and be appreciative of where I am, don't have any expectations, and nail my fueling. Because those are the things that you can control, and those are the things that are going to absolutely deter or mess up your performance on race day. Because people go into races with time goals, right? And you could go into a race like a lot of people saw. A lot of people had hopes and dreams of having a 20-minute swim at Chattanooga 70.3, and then it's actually like closer to 1.6, not 1.4, and it was super slow. There was no current. And so they don't take, and it was insanely hot, right? So you look at the performance metrics versus the ones you can control, because if you can get right executing whatever you have that day, the nutrition that goes along with it, and the mindset, then you're going to do well on a full distance. Don't be obsessed with, all right, I need my swim pace to be this, I need my bike pace to be this, and I need my run pace to be this. That will tell me I'm on the right track. Because if you look about how you periodize or how you plan your race, schedule, we've had a lot of athletes before that have basically beaten their 70.3 times 2 time. Like I'll go way, way, way back just because I don't know why I was thinking about Rev 3 in Knoxville. I was thinking about Corey Coggins, who did like a 6.5 hour, like 70.3 at Rev 3 and then did Louisville in like 11 hours or something like that. Like it was around there.
Just under 12.
It was less than the 70.3 times 2 math plus, 30 minutes all people use. It's about the volume and the kind of training you put in. I think that's where people get kind of confused is like, if you have a peak A race of the year, then you should only be doing your best training of the year close to that race,
right?
Not before your 70.3, not 20 weeks out. That's why you take your time. That's why you're patient. That's why you have a process. That's why you have, you were talking about Jason Ramley again, he was in here, a guy who's like, hey man, he's like, the last few weeks, man, things have gotten pretty real. And I was like, yeah, because we're getting on the crunch time. You got 8 or 9 weeks race day. Like, it shouldn't be like that all year round. Like your body can't sustain it, and neither can most people from a mental, emotional standpoint. It's called your big race for a big reason. Big races get big training. Big training should get a big response. And so that's just a thing that I think people tend to miscategorize in terms of like assuming that a 70.3 before an A race should basically give them a calculation of how they're going to do, or if they totally messed up, or if they nailed it. It's just one day, right? And so I think going into these races, feeling a little more, feeling a bit frisky, like, hey, this could go really, really awesome. Who knows what I can do? Play around with it. Another thing to do, play around with it. See what you can do. Like one of our other coaches, Phil Jones, raced. He's been having some Achilles issues with his run, and it hasn't been running a lot. And I said, all right, dude, it takes 4 days. I said, I want you to hammer the bike. I want you to hammer it. I want you to go like way out of your zone and try to hammer it and just see what happens. What that does is it also alleviates some of the pressure of performing on a total race, right? On the total stage itself. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, today's more of an experiment than it is a guarantee of future success. And I think that, again, removes some of the, pressure. It's a lot of people, I will say, pick one thing, especially if it's in a lead up to an Ironman, pick one thing to nail. The rest, pace it like you would a full, get that feeling, get that, and then maybe rip the run or rip the bike, or just picks one thing to nail, not the whole thing, one thing. And I think that's a couple things you can do to kind of like release some of the pressure, again, that people have before a big race and when they haven't raced in 2 years.
That's a great idea. It reminded me of back when I was a kid, when I was playing summer baseball, and my coach, I was a 15-year-old, and the Summer Legion went through 18-year-olds, and you just talked about a guy who won the world. What was that guy's name? The tennis guy, the 16-year-old.
Oh, Michael Chang. This is way back. This is like 80s. Yeah,
okay,
Michael
but
Chang,
he won
French
the
Open.
British Open, and as a 16-year-old. But back in the day, it was nowadays kids are like winning things. They're just so much more exposed to competition and pressure and things like that. You see 17-year-olds hit the game winners at the national title game, whatever, 18-year-olds. And back then I was 15, and he moved me up to the quote unquote varsity, and that was like super unheard of. And he said to me, he goes, I don't care if you get a hit. He goes, just play good defense. And that just took all the pressure away. He was like, just, all right. So I went up and played defense and ended up hitting okay or whatever. But like you brought up Corey Coggins at that Louisville thing. I was actually going to bring him up in this podcast when we started talking, because he struggled in a 70.3, like, had a really rough day. And then he raced Louisville in a way that always, I always think about that actually. He was just so, tortoise in the hair, or he's the tortoise, man. He just kind of like was
steady Eddie.
Oh, steady, man. I'm just watching him, and he's just like, and I had a conversation about a month ago with Dave, my friend, he's a good cyclist, and he's like, I hate to say this. He goes, but, through the end of the bike, if you're in really good shape and you've trained right, you should pace that so it kind of feels easy. Yeah. And that stuck with me, because I think 90% at least, probably triathletes that do an Ironman fight like mad to get through the end of the bike. and then they're just screwed. I mean, even no matter, you can look at TriCalc all you want. You're just, in deep shit at that point.
Exactly.
So when he was saying that, it's like and I remind me of Corey. He's just like, he just paced everything all day. And I'm not saying Ironman should be easy, but in reference to, or your training, you should try to make it feel as easy as possible to get through that bike. So in other words, don't crush the bike, don't go out too hard, don't swim too hard, all that other stuff. You got to have, that's just like the ultimate in patience, and I most people think they can, and me included, think they can, like go out there and really, try to shred the bike above your capabilities, and you're pushing yourself too hard. And it always comes back to what we say, the last 8 miles of that run. That's the only time you should really like throw, what's that saying? Shit to the wind or whatever.
Sure. It sounds good. I thought it was caution to the wind.
Caution to the wind. But seriously, it's just, we talk about this stuff all the time. And then, people do Ironman races, and it really comes down to that, you have to train hard enough to get to a point where you can do the race through the bike in a fairly manageable fashion, and then just feel pretty good for most of the run, and then just, suffer.
The last, I always kind of, and this is in like our pre-race email we send out, like the last 20% of the bike oftentimes ruins people's last 20% of the entire race.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. They go way, like basically starting at like mile 80, because that's kind of when because listen, like as a coach, we know this, like you can generally know where an athlete should be, or that their training has said they should be on race day, not with speed, but just with power, heart rate. But even then, you don't know how they're going to feel that day. So I kind of give some general guidelines up until mile 80. And then after that, I kind of say, hey, listen, this is your race. You make the decisions. I just kind of want to keep the lid on up until mile 80, because that's given them at least, 4 hours of time to be like, all right, now I really know how I feel. Not after hour 2 and they're like, I'm going to hammer, I got it all day. And then after 2 hours, like, that was a bad choice. But I always say, if you want to push it. However, ask yourself, is it worth it? And what I'm doing right now going to allow me to run the last 6.2 miles of this marathon? And if the answer is no, then you don't do it. Like, it is really that simple of like, when you triage, should I or should I not do something? The question you should always ask, down the very last question you should ask in that formula is it going to allow me to run my best last 6.2 miles of the marathon? Because that's when people lose tens of minutes, not just minutes, tens of minutes. Even if starting at mile 18 of the second loop, people do. And I honestly think what happens with a lot of people in their mentality of being on the bike is that people they're so tired, yet they're so ready to be off the bike that they're like, screw it. I just want to get off this bike. And then they get off that bike and they spend a lot of time on the run course because they went way over what they're capable of doing on the bike, just because the last hour they couldn't contain themselves from just being steady Eddie, keeping things under control. Because listen, even if you pick up the pace from mile 80, you got 32 miles left. So for some people, it's an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. Even if you pick up the pace like 10, 15 watts, just the last hour and a half, you're going to come off the bike like maybe a couple minutes before you would. But the detriment and where you're going to end up paying the piper on that is the run. And so, but people get so caught up in wanting to get off the bike or looking at their bike split. Like that is, and we say this all the time. You hear more people talk about their bike splits on the run course than anywhere else on race day. Why? It's because they're walking, right? There is no such thing as a good bike split followed by a bad run split. It just means you overbiked. And then for a lot of people, it also means you overswam. Well, technically you probably didn't overswim. You're probably undertrained on the swim. Again, going back to like the cascade effect, that is energy expenditure on race day. Most people just assume that they can do something on a race, and then they don't take into account, like everyone does bike run, bricks. You don't see a lot of people doing a hard 2.4 mile swim and then getting on the bike. And then, no, they don't do that because it's probably not the most ideal thing to do, but it's just all about it's all about those last 20. It's all about being patient. And I think that's just one thing that, you have to stay patient on, is going into races and thinking, like you said about Corey, like he had a bad race. And for a lot of people, I think acknowledging that you aren't in your best shape, but you're headed there, is such a great mentality to have on a race, because you kind of don't expect the best. You just want to see how you are in your progression heading towards your best. So you don't know, it's not going to be a direct reflection of your best because you haven't given your best. You haven't done your best training yet. But it should be, and I think that again takes away some of the pressure, some of the expectations of what you do and how you're going to, how that's going to catapult you forward to your big race. Because listen, races are races. You forget about them. You need to have we've always talked about having the cornerback mentality. Give up a touchdown, it better be gone the next play, because if you don't, you're giving up another one. You're giving up another one. It has to be it's just one race, just like workouts. It's just one. You got the great ones, you got the bad ones, and guess what? You could race for 20 years. You could do 50 Ironman and 50 70.3s. You're going to have one worst and one best. That's it. Everything else is going to come in between. So you got to have a short memory and just go into these races more with hey, this is what I'm focused on. These are the things I can control. And I want to use this as not a presumptive, data-driven example of what my time is actually going to be like on race day, because then that's a lot of pressure. Because then you're thinking, then I've got to hold that, right? It has to be more of a kind of an exploratory race, in my opinion, on what you're good at, what you need to improve on, and just where are you in general. And I think that can be a freeing place to be when you go into a race.
Mm-hmm. Because it is, unless you're really dialed in on power, your heart rate or something like that, it is a difficult thing to kind of understand, am I biking hard enough or not hard enough? And to find that spot is very interesting. And I've even been riding lately with chrono, with no computer and stuff like that. And it's very interesting to go out there and say, all right, I know I'm not there yet, but could I hold this? Yeah, I think I could. I'm in that, like you're talking, it's sort of a discovery phase, right? Where you're just trying to figure out what kind of shape you're in, but knowing you have time. And it's so easy to get trapped, 14 weeks in front of an Ironman going, man, there's no way I can hold that tri-calc pace right now. And then really feeling but how many people can trust that process? It's very difficult. I think when you start getting in your head and you always want to see the number that you want to see on race day in training, 15 weeks out or 10 weeks out or 8 weeks out, and you're not there yet, and there's so many variables. I mean, what happened the night before? You're not really mentally in race mode, all these things. And I always talk about course energy, and there's all kinds of stuff that really comes into play. Because when I rode the course Madison the other day, we rode it all right, pretty solid, but I know that on race day, I'll be tapered for one, I'll feel better, it'll be race energy, and things will feel easier. And it's all about, for me on a race day, it's kind of like one of those things, how do you pull back? How do you pull back? How do you pull back? Because it is so exciting to kind of finally be out there, and you're on the course, and, in the aid stations, and people are cheering the whole 9 yards. But back to your point, I thought it was a great one about, I just want to get this bike over. And I've been telling anyone that's racing Wisconsin, do not underestimate that last 15, 16 miles, because you get through the loop the second time, and you're like, yes, I'm in. And now I just want to get back. And you kind of start pushing to save that bike split or whatever. And I have fallen for that trap every single time, because you think that stick is flat because you're flying out on the way out, and then you don't realize that there's 3 hills maybe on Wayland Road or whatever it is. And
usually a headwind.
And a headwind. And then you're just demoralized, because
I laugh every time I hear somebody say, you just got to get to mile 80 and it's downhill pretty much the mirror. I'm like,
yeah, because the graph
totally is a mind F. You look at the graph and you're like, dude, So what you're telling me is really I only need to train for like an 80-mile bike. Like,
yeah.
Because
and Louisville is like, for some reason, it feels like it's only
80,
a
85. Yeah,
bike,
it has the same type.
It kind of like looks, and it's all downhill from 60, 70
Yeah,
miles.
because you had the same, it's the same like lollipop nature of a course. Like you get on the back end, the back stick of the lollipop, you're like, basically it's downhill. The rest of the home way, and then you don't look at like the elevation graph and it's going from like 0 to 10. You're like, no, you're really not getting this like, steep decline going back to the end of the bike. And there also is a headwind, and you're also tired. Like that's the biggest thing is like people put like what's comfortable and not comfortable in like the wrong category. Like if you're at the end of your bike and you're uncomfortable, stop trying so hard. You're uncomfortable for a reason. Like you probably aren't pacing things correctly. Don't bike harder while also already uncomfortable. Take your time, spin your legs out, recover a little bit while moving on your bike, right? Coast a little bit if you need to. Don't just absolutely throw the hammer down because you just can't wait to get off the bike. Because listen, that's because people have bad bike positions. People ready to get off the bike. They didn't nail their nutrition. They're like, just get me off. They'll put their head down and hammer the last 10 miles. They won't take any nutrition. They won't realize what's going on. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're stuck. And you're like, wait, those last, because you think about 10 miles, like, it's not that long. Yeah, even if you average 20 miles an hour, it's 30 minutes. You know how like at the end of a 2.4, 112-mile segment, like that's a lot of energy to put out after you're already tired. And you have to run a marathon on concrete for 26. Like, I think I want to save myself. But it's just so hard to, we had lunch last week after our endless pool debacle, which I will say everything is fine. Like we were very lucky. We have a drain set up next to the pump madness, and apparently, according to the neighbors, it happened just like an hour or two before we got here. So all is well. No water damage. We're good to go, but just waiting on a part for this pool. But we had lunch with him. He's a CPA, and he was talking about kicking the can. And kicking the can, I think, is like a perfect analogy for Ironman race day. Kick the can down the road until you get to like the back half of the marathon. Then you don't have to kick the can anymore in terms of like when to pull the plug, when to do it, when to go, when to push it. Don't kick the can, make the decision again down the road, do something different down the road. Don't just do it right now. Kick the can, because if you can keep that and you can be running, if you've run the whole first half of the marathon and you get to like, the out portion, to me, that's like where, that's the game that I've always played when I've raced in Ironman, is definitely run the first half. And then from a mental standpoint, just tell yourself, all I've got to do is be steady until I get to the turnaround. Because then when you get to the turnaround, you're only 5-6 miles away from home. And at that point, you can say, all right, all I got to do is make it under an hour. I can do this for less than an hour. I can chip things away. Like it's funny how like we mentally have like tricks in our mind that are like, that seems attainable. This seems, like I did a very uncomfortable bike ride on Friday because I had to mess around with my schedule, and then got on the bike Saturday morning for another very uncomfortable ride. And it had basically an hour long TT in the segment, which did not feel like it was going to be very fun. It was something that I was actually really, really dreading because I had really, really hammered it out on the day before. It was a shorter session, but I really went after it, even knowing. So I got on the bike, my legs didn't feel great. And to me, not just in the hour of putting out an hour of like power and hard intervals, it was just the hour itself of like staying focused on a hard effort for an hour. So I thought, all right, my goal for the hour segment was 252 watts. That was the minimum I was like about 10 or 15 watt range. And so I told myself, all right, don't even start at 250, start at 235, 240, and just see what happens. Because again, an hour is a very long time. But once I got to 30 minutes, the next minute I could say, I've only got 20 something minutes left. Even though it was closer to 30 than it was to 20, just the mentality shift of, okay, I've got like in the 20-minute range. I can do that for just 20 minutes, even though it's not like, 20 minutes and 1 second. It's 29 minutes and 55 seconds. It was just that mental trick of I can do it. But what I had to do was put myself in a place where I could do that for the last 30 minutes and not shell myself for the last 30 minutes. So I went in because honestly, I wanted to quit the first 20 minutes. I'm like, It's just one of those days. I don't have it today, but I gave myself enough time. And then again, once I got to where I was like, all I got's the 20 minutes. I can do it for 20 because it just seems so much more attainable than 60. And I ended up hitting to the hour mark, and my average watts was just like 249. And I thought, you know what, I'll just stay on this till I hit 252. So I ended up going for an hour and 9 minutes until I hit 252 because I was wanting that number a little bit too bad.
Nice job, man.
But it all came down to how I paced the first 30 minutes, not just physically, but mentally. Because I think if you go after from out of the gate, you only have so much mental and emotional energy to stay focused and dig to that like deep place to where you think like, this isn't going to feel any easier. This is just going to be more uncomfortable. That's how the Ironman is. That is how the marathon is in the Ironman. It's how long can I delay having to dig as deep as I can dig? Because listen, no matter what race you do, Olympic, 70.3, full, whatever it is, once you get to a point, you know it's not going to technically hurt worse. It's because you've reached your max. Like you can't move faster because you're so tired. You can't move faster to make it hurt worse. Your just legs are like rocks. Every foot strike, everything hurts. Mentally, you can make yourself run to the finish line. It's just how long do you have to keep convincing yourself you can make it to the next mile, and then make it to the next mile, and then make it to the next mile. So to me, if you can make it to mile 20 of a full and think, I've only got a 10K left. All right, let me just count down the miles. I got 1 mile to go. Okay, I can do one more mile. That's when you start clicking things together. But you can only do that if you've nailed the first 120 miles of the entire race, which is where most people tend to, 130 miles of the race, whatever it is, 135. That's where most people make all the mistakes, but that's also where the entire race, most of the race is won or lost, is the back half of the marathon or the last, 3 to 5 miles of the half marathon.
I agree. And
you concur?
I concur. It's so difficult to balance that out. And you're right, it is mostly the mind that does it. And it's just so much better to approach a race like that and get to that point than get to that point earlier and try to hang on. It's sort of like, okay, can I push this further instead of like always just because, it's like anything when somebody goes out too fast and they're leading, you're like, whoa, they got it. They're crushing it, whatever. And then the next thing, it's all about holding on for way too long. I mean, the last 6 or 8 miles is about holding on. And like we talk about, it's not about going faster. It's about not slowing down at that point. But if you start the not slowing down thing at mile 10 of that marathon, that becomes, that is like a massive test of mental fortitude at that point. I mean, it's not impossible. I think I've done that a lot, but man, it's just not enjoyable at all. And I'm not saying that it should be like completely enjoyable, but there's better ways to do it. And I think an interesting point you made about on the last 10 miles of that, 12 miles of that bike is if you're feeling uncomfortable and tired, it's for a reason probably. So try to work on some of that in-race recovery kind of stuff, because it is amazing. Like if, I'm sure you've done it when we go out to the trace or whatever, we ride like a 40 mile, we come back to the bike or the car and sort of reload and stand on your feet for a minute and just stop pedaling the same way over and over. Like you kind of feel like you're a different person sometimes, even with a 5-minute break. So I think that's the stuff we can do within the race and sort of find that recovery. And plus on the bike, it's so weird because I was out riding Saturday and there's a guy, he's kind of ahead, or I was catching up to him and then I sort of got to him and then he just like kind of was pulling away from me a little bit. I'm like, I'm going to go get that guy. And I had to really work to go get him. And he wasn't like, he might've had an electric bike. I'm not sure. Oh my God. But he didn't. But the thing was, it was like, then I got by it, but the point is like, I felt like he wasn't going that fast, but the effort it took me to get to him, and he wasn't riding away from me by any means. So the point was like, he was maybe like 3 seconds ahead of me, and maybe over the course of a mile, that might be 8 seconds or whatever. And like you're saying, it's just not that much of a difference. On a bike, you can just kind of
I used to see it all. I used to feel that all the time at the lab, right? Because we had this 1.2 mile airstrip loop that we do, and you'd hop on, and you'd be like, you'd come out of the tee to hop on the loop, and there'd be a guy exactly across the way. So you're exactly 1.2 miles across, and you're like, how am I gonna hammer? I'm gonna catch him. Just a mile, right? Just like 1.2, and you're hammered, and you're like, I can't catch this guy. Or it takes you 20 or 30 minutes to catch him, and then by then, they're probably going to pass you again because you're smoked, right? How much effort it takes to just get a little bit of extra time. And again, for most people, a mile on the bike course, you're doing 20 miles an hour is 3 minutes. That's not that, like divide that over 26.2 miles. Like, and I guess to kind of summarize and like break it down, hopefully in a simple manner is, and everybody talks about 80-20 rules on basically everything you do in life. But listen, the first 80% of your race, think about your legs. Let your legs do the talking in terms of like feel and let them be the driver of how the day is going. Listen to them, respect them. Don't overthink. Don't go for expectations. The last 20% of the race, it's got to be in your head and your heart. You get that has to be the overwhelming, prevalent. Make yourself keep moving forward. But you can only do that if you've saved enough legs to make it. Make yourself do that, or you haven't dug a hole so deep that is, I just got to get off this bike. So I'm gonna hammer out for the last 15 miles because then you have. Listen, if you get off the bike and your sigh you have more of a sigh of relief that, God, thank God I'm off that thing. Now let me just figure out a way how to run. No, bad news. Getting off the bike feeling like, man, that feels good. Ready to roll, like mentally and physically, then you're destined for a good half or full marathon.
Okay. I'll trust you on that.
Yeah, we tend to negative split our podcast too because we start out slow.
I know.
But we always appreciate you. And it's a Monday. We hope you had an awesome Monday. Last week was a short week for most of you. It was a short week for us too. We appreciate you as always tuning in. If you want to, you can follow us on Instagram. We're at C26_triathlon. That'll give you a good idea of all the things we have going on in our amazing community. Also our website. It's our one-stop shop. It is C26triathlon.com. It is all things coaching, camps, and community. Last time I checked, we had one spot available for our camp next June in 2022 in Nashville. So if you want to hop in that, don't wait. It'll be gone in a minute. Then we also have our camp in the Woodlands, Texas next March. I think that has now 9 spots left as this morning. So click on the links we provide for those if you're interested. If you have any questions about camps, you can email c26operations@gmail.com. And if you have any interest in coaching, we have that coaching tab provided on the website. Again, that website is c26triathlon.com.
All right.
That's all I got, man.
Good negative split. Way to hold it back. 80-20. 80-10. All right, man. Have a great day.
See you, man.